So today I'm going to be telling you about why I became a Hindu. It's a bit of a mix between how I became a Hindu and why I became a Hindu. So I'll be talking for about 30-35 minutes, and then we'll be keeping tabs on the questions that are coming in, and I'll try to answer some afterwards. So do keep the questions going, please. So first, a little bit about my background. So you get to know a bit about who I was before I even knew really about Hinduism. So I have always lived in the UK. My parents, one is from Denmark, and the other, my father, his parents were from Poland. So I'm truly European, but I have always lived in the UK. So because my mother's from Denmark, that's a predominantly Protestant Christian country, and my father's heritage is from Poland and East Europe. So his family were brought up as Catholics. So when I was born, there was a bit of a tussle in the family. I was the first sort of grandchild to be born, about the way that I would be christened. Would I be christened as a Protestant or a Catholic? And I guess that was the first glimpse into the sort of the division that was occurring in the family because of the religion that the family was following. But put that aside, I was christened Catholic, but then my mother made sure I went to a Protestant primary school. So every week we would have the priest come into school on a Friday and give assembly essentially, and we would go to church some Sundays. So we weren't a strongly Christian family, but we certainly did go to church, and I would go to like the Sunday school for the little children while the parents are sitting in church. And moving then to a secondary school, it was, I guess, sort of more like a secular secondary school. There was no, it wasn't a faith school, but it certainly still had a Christian slant to it. We would still go to the cathedral for big occasions. And I thought it'd be worthwhile me mentioning that while I was studying at school in RE lessons, the religious education lessons, we learnt about all of the major religions, Sikhism, Islam, Christianity obviously, Judaism, but we never learnt about Hinduism. So to be honest, I was aware of the word Hinduism, and I think I knew it was a religion. It's quite difficult for me to now remember from that time, but I think it just made me now, looking back, think, wow, they were really trying to come across that Hinduism maybe doesn't belong on the religious education syllabus, certainly when I was at school. And whether that was deliberate or not, I don't know. But that was something that, looking back now, I feel that really has to change. And I really hope that the UK religious education system has changed. So moving then from school, again, as I said, not really knowing anything about Hinduism, I went to university, first to study physics at Imperial College, and worked very, very hard and did well, and then moved on to University of Oxford, and again worked really, really hard. This time I was studying a PhD in statistics, applied to medical imaging. And because I was just so focused on doing well in my exams, but also doing well in sports, I did a lot of sport, 4 or 5 hours a day of sports I would do. I was just very focused on being successful. And it was almost like a drug to me that I would wake up in the morning and just think about how I would be progressing towards the next exam or the next competition, sports competition. And to be honest, it actually made me very mentally and physically unwell. So I came out of my PhD almost quite a broken person, because I was so focused on doing really well. And I had done really well. I did really well in my exams. I did really, really well in sports. But inside, I felt quite, broken, I think is the simplest word to put it as. And I think it boils down to the fact that in the West, people associate their self-worth with themselves, with who they are and what they have and their status. And there are many, when I do my research now, there are many studies that show, epidemiological studies that show, that people who are very motivated by external goals, by their status, the way the world looks at them, or what they own, what possessions they have, that is more strongly linked to mental illness than any trauma that you could imagine occurring in your life. So somebody who is very poor, has horrific things happen in their life, as long as they have intrinsic goals, they look inwards, they try and strengthen themselves from within, they are much more likely to be able to cope in that situation than somebody who is constantly looking out and maybe suffers a slight disappointment in their lives and they can't cope because all their self-worth is placed on external factors that they can't control. And really it comes down to the fact that in the West, there's the sense that, although they've confused the words autonomy, which means to be thinking for yourself, and that's ultimately what we would want anyone to be able to do. They should be able to think for themselves. But in the West, particularly when there's been a very strong push by Abrahamic religions, particularly to be following a faith with blind belief, to be able to think for yourself is actually quite a recent thing in the West, because before, if you tried to question something, you'd be killed or you'd be put under house arrest, so it was not a good idea. So people now want to embrace the idea of being able to think for themselves, to be autonomous. But in the West, that's got confused with the word independence, where you are trying to think of yourself all the time. So instead of thinking for yourself, you're thinking of yourself and how you need to make an impact on the world and how you need to be viewed in the world. And so, as I said, I think all of these factors kind of impacted on me individually in a very strongly negative way. And I came out of my PhD and into the working world feeling a bit lost, even though obviously I had many opportunities open to me. And it was at that time then that I met my husband, and he really helped me to see that it is actually good to be still, not to be constantly pushing myself, trying to find the next goal, trying to find the next competition to win, but actually just to be still and at peace with myself. And that was a completely new experience for me. And so that was, when I first met him, that was, I guess, maybe actually one of the reasons I was, we were keen to, then I was keen to move to go to India. And one of the first places we met, as it happens, is Kerala. We had just got engaged and we went on a holiday to Kerala. And I really loved it. I loved Kerala. I loved meeting my to-be Hindu family, my Indian family. But at that time, my understanding of India, Hinduism, was basically nothing. As I said in school, it was almost like Hinduism didn't exist. So at that time, looking at it from Western eyes, it was a lot to take in. Although I did love it, I have to say. I mean, I loved the colours, I loved the food, just the vibrancy of life. Everyone was always dancing and singing at any gathering. I absolutely loved it. If I felt suddenly alive, having come from this very suppressed mindset where I was going into my PhD every day, typing on my computer code, going home, maybe watching some TV, going to bed, to now being in a world of colour, tasty food and things. It was quite a revelation to me. And I absolutely fell in love with India on that first trip. So then, as I said, that was, I guess, quite a sort of superficial introduction to India and Hinduism. But over the months after we got married, and now it's about 4.5 years since we got married, that superficiality has gained a lot of depth. And I guess the initial way in which it gained depth was when I was lying in bed and my husband, to go to sleep, he would be listening to Swami Sarpanandan and introducing Vedanta. And as I was lying in bed, I would just feel this being completely at peace. It was almost like I would melt, I would feel. It was just, everything made complete sense. I didn't even have to try to think. It all just made complete sense. And that, as I said, that I feel was probably the turning point in my life where I thought, wow, there's really something amazing in the world that before I wasn't even aware of. And actually, I wouldn't say that I was never aware of it, because thinking back, when I was a very young child of about maybe 7, 8 years old, I do remember there being times where I'd be just sitting in the car while my mum was driving, where I would just feel like almost like a dissociation and be like, wow, who am I? What is this world? What's the purpose of all this? And it was almost like I would return to that sort of dissociative space or mind space while listening to the lectures on Vedanta. And almost, I said, almost like melt away. It was, very, very special. So learning more and more about Vedanta, and particularly the ideas that we are all one, we are all Brahman, that the universe, all of existence operates on such massive, massive time scales, that humanity or living beings, that you have multiple lives, there is rebirth, and that ultimately all of our fear, all of our attachments, it's to do with ego. Understanding all of this, I found really liberating and really empowering. And I felt that actually that was the major thing that occurred to me that kind of strengthened my mental state so much, like a completely new level, to a level that I couldn't even imagine existed before that. And really it gave me then the confidence to set up a business. And I'll talk a bit more about that later. But it just goes to show that I went from this state of feeling quite lost after constantly chasing goals, competitions, awards, to then seeing the world in a completely different way, seeing life in a completely different way, and finding such strength in that I felt strong enough to take a giant, very risky leap and set up my own business as a very young person. So I really do credit that to Vedanta and Hinduism. And I think it just goes to show that being a Hindu, you can be incredibly successful, I think. I feel I am, evidence of that thinking as a Hindu is a real asset to doing well in the world, in doing business. So over the years, I've come to understand Hinduism more and more, obviously. So many of the ways in which I've learned more about Hinduism is it's like reading the Amar Chichakata comics. And I really would recommend them, particularly for children. I mean, I guess as an adult I was reading these because I was having to learn from absolute scratch. But they are really excellent introductions to everything to do with Hinduism. So, for any children's birthdays, please do gift these to them. And things like watching the Mahabharata and the Ramayana series. As we all know, there's been the recent revival of these series on TV. So I first saw these a few years ago, and then we've just been watching them in the last few months with you all, synced in time. And things that I've really learned from these itihas is that I have become so much more sensitive to the world, to plants, to animals, because actually when you are brought up in the West, and particularly with a Christian framework, there is the sense that humans are completely separate from all else of life. There's a massive gap, and that all else of life, they don't have souls. That's what Christians believe, that animals don't have souls, which is a bit ridiculous really when you think, because obviously evolution shows that we're all just gradations of animals. But that I feel as a result of learning about Hinduism, I am so much more sensitive to animals, to plants, and I have so much more respect for them. And I'm so much more conscious about having like a low carbon footprint and just looking after the world. Another thing I feel I've learned on a personal level from the Mahabharata and the Ramayana is that I've been very humbled by the experiences of the people in these Itihas, in particular, I guess, Ma Sita. She really stands out, Ma Sita. Everything that she went through, all the challenges that she faced, and she did it with such grace, with such dignity, with such acceptance. And I find that very humbling. And I found that has really, it helps me put things into perspective. So since then, learning about the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, I've also, become doing more and more puja. And particularly on doing puja at like Navratri, for example, Navratri, it has really made me realize how much Hinduism reveres women. And again, as someone coming from a Christian framework, that was a real revelation, because in Christianity, you have a male God. He sends his son to mankind, and there's no worship of anything feminine or female in any of that. And there's a very clear divide between male and female, and things like, for example, homosexuality is completely, considered very, very, very bad. You're going to hell for eternity. And through puja, through worship of Shakti, through, the worship of the different forms of Shakti during Navratri, I have realized that Hinduism, they don't have this black and white view about masculine and feminine, that ultimately these are a spectrum. And yes, we have male and female genders, which map somehow onto this spectrum, but it's not a binary thing. And ultimately, a female can have certain characteristics that are very strong, very brave, but she can also be very peaceful, very calm, a mother as well as a warrioress. And that's something that Christianity, that perception does not exist at all. A woman is at home looking after the children. She's a child rearer. And something that, in today's world, an example I can give of this is I have one school friend who's a very strong Christian, and at work she refuses to be promoted, even though she's very, very capable. She's got fantastic credentials, but she refuses to be promoted at work, even though she's earned it, because she feels she cannot give instructions to a man. And if she were promoted, she would have men in her team, and she feels she cannot do that as a Christian. And so to me, that's I feel a very regressive mindset, and something that just does not exist in Hinduism. You only have to look at throughout history in India and all of the amazingly strong dharmic women that have existed, from Jhansi Ki Rani to Rani Dida and Rani Durgavati. So many examples of these women who were leading whole armies, and you don't have any examples of that occurring throughout the history, certainly in the UK. So ultimately, being so empowered to be worshipping Shakti for weeks each year, weeks are dedicated to the worship of Shakti. I have found that really empowering as a woman, and it's also made me feel much more feminine, I think. Which maybe sounds a bit odd, as what I've just been saying about it not being so, Hinduism not seeing femininity and masculinity as black and white. It's more of a spectrum, and actually I feel that has helped me feel more feminine. And that's particularly because, as a result of that binary outlook on the genders that has existed in the West, there's almost like a backlash happening in the West, where they're saying, actually, there aren't two genders. Actually, we're all exactly the same. There's like a blending of gender. And it's not like we're saying that there's a spectrum of gender, but that actually that everyone is the same. And actually that doesn't make sense at all. And even if you ask a feminist this in the UK or in the West, they wouldn't agree with the idea that, for example, men should enjoy wearing lipstick and things like this. So actually the whole idea about blending of gender and the feminist viewpoint in the West, it's gone to the opposite extreme now. And I feel that Hinduism has ultimately made me feel more feminine than, whereas in the West, it seems to be going the other way. I find it very confusing. But ultimately, I feel more feminine, and I also feel that I have equal opportunity as a result of being a Hindu. And we only have to look at the statistics in the UK. When you look at the Hindu statistics on where teenagers are going to university, how are they doing in their school exams, Hindu girls are outscoring all other ethnicities and boys. They really, really stand out. So Hindu parents have high ambitions for their daughters. And yeah, it's just, I find that, you know, fantastic. So ultimately, through Vedanta and watching Mahabharata and Ramayana and just learning about Hinduism, doing puja, it's really helped me to look inwards. And ultimately, that is what Hinduism does. It's a seeking religion. You seek to learn new things, to question, to debate. And actually, one of the things I really loved about my husband when I first met him was that he was always asking so many questions about things, so curious. And since then I've realised that's a real Indian trait. You're always wanting to know why and to question things. In fact, you only have to look at the Bhagavad Gita. It's just a series of questions. And that really, really is the greatest contrast to Christianity. And I think it's one of the reasons why I made that transition so easily, because I could see the value in asking questions. So in the UK, Christianity really is falling off the cliff. It's very uncool. So the latest statistic is that about 1.8% of the population goes to church now on a regular basis. 1.8%. It's very, very low. And that is predominantly because people are questioning and choosing to leave Christianity. And this is now possible. So in the past, it wasn't possible. If you did ask questions, uncomfortable questions, then, or if you wanted to leave Christianity, you know, that was considered heresy. You would be burned alive. It was, you know, you could be sentenced to death. And you know, there have been some real key examples of this happening. So for example, the scientist Galileo, the scientist who was, you know, looking through his telescope and seeing that the sun is at the center of the solar system, and that is just one star of many. And he was saying, look, that does show that the Earth is not the center of the universe with everything else circling around it. And for making that observation on the world, he was put under house arrest. I mean, he was actually one of the lucky ones. He wasn't burnt alive, but many of his contemporary scientists, they were. It was extremely dangerous to ask questions in the West. Whereas, as I say, in India, you're encouraged to ask questions. So in the West, people are leaving Christianity now that they have the opportunity, the freedom to ask questions. They are questioning things like, why are there so many inconsistencies in the Bible? You know, why do the different authors, because there's different, you know, gospels within, they have lots of contradictions. And you know, when you look at the historical evidence, you'll realize that there is nothing written in the Bible, particularly, you know, the New Testament, that happened at that time. It was all reported like 200 years later. And looking at some of the content that these authors have written about, it shows that they weren't even, living in the area that, for example, Jesus was in. They were living in a completely different country. So there've been tales told, and they've then since reported it. And while at the same time you have lots of historical evidence of what was going on in like the Roman Empire, including in what's now Israel, there's no historical evidence of, for example, Jesus happening at, or existing at that time. So people are questioning that. Why is there no historical evidence? There's only this Bible, written hundreds of years later. They're also questioning the central premise, which is that if you believe in Jesus and the Christian God, then you will go to heaven, which is a much nicer place than this world. So you can make a real mess of your life in this world, but as long as you believe in Jesus, you can then have a lovely rest of your existence in heaven. And that then calls into question, well, someone like Hitler, who killed 6 million Jews, there's a good chance Christians believe he still went to heaven because he was a very devout Catholic. He would say his prayers every day. He felt he was doing good for the world, and that would be enough for him to get into heaven, even though he killed 6 million people in the worst of ways. And yet somebody who is doing lots and lots of philanthropy, they're doing lots and lots of good work for humanity, for the world, they won't be going to heaven. They'll be going to suffer in hell for all eternity if they don't believe in that version of God and Jesus being his son. And many people in the West just find that it just doesn't sit right at all. And speaking then to when I was talking earlier about how in my family, we had the Christians, the Catholic side from the Eastern European, my paternal line, and then the Protestants from my maternal line, and there being lots of divisions in the family as a result of that. Now we literally have aunts and uncles that don't talk to each other anymore because they have gone down different branches of Christianity. So the divisiveness of Christianity has really become apparent, and people are turning away from that. And in contrast, when you look at Hinduism, somebody who is a Hanumanji Bhakt, he'll have still great respect for someone who is a Lord Shiva Bhakt, or someone who is a Lakshmiji, Ma Lakshmi Bhakt. So there's love and respect for all versions of Hinduism. So I just reflect on that school friend I mentioned earlier, the very strict Christian, who I said won't get promoted at work because she can't give instructions to men. So she has become one type of Christian, a Church of England Christian, very strongly, and her parents are a different type of Christian. I actually can't remember which type, there's so many types. And she cries herself to sleep at night because she feels her parents are going to go to hell and burn eternity because they don't believe in her version or how she sees Jesus and God being. And that's just horrible. They are still strong Christians, but there are slight subtle differences between the two outlooks on Christianity. So yeah, that's really turning people away because it's breaking up families. One thing that really I feel turned me away from Christianity is when I then became aware of the Itihas, of the Vedas, I became to appreciate just how amazingly beautiful, how amazingly deep the content, the wisdom within it is, and how there's nothing that's black and white. Ultimately, that it's up to you and the situation you're in. You are empowered to understand, to identify what is the dharmic stance to take. That's really empowering, and probably something that Hindus just take for granted, because that's, of course. Whereas as a Christian, you're told there are these absolutes, there are these rights and wrongs, and you have to live by these black and white commandments, or you are a bad Christian. But many of these black and white commandments, they are completely irrelevant to modern life, or just completely outdated. And I feel it's actually quite patronizing on that, there's this massive and very complex universe out there that God, or Bhagwan as we would know, has created. Would Bhagwan be as patronizing to humanity as saying, look, there are these 10 rules, black and white, that you follow? Or would he empower people and life to explore for themselves, to grow, to become better, to learn, to seek, to be so much more progressive? So I certainly feel that Bhagwan would want to be creating an opportunity for us all to grow, not to be put down with a set of yes/no rules. And then thinking a little to what I was describing earlier about, for example, homosexuals, that Christianity, these things like homosexuals and animals, they are seen as inferior, and that in the modern age where scientific evidence and a more secular outlook has made many Christians question some of the central verses, for example, in the Bible, and for that reason, when they've maybe have had a homosexual friend, they've realized that it's just not compatible, the way that they're learning when they go to church on a Sunday, to their real world experience of having a great friend. Yes, he's homosexual perhaps, but he's a great friend, he's a lovely person, does excellent things for the world. Why should that person go to hell because of that? And again, Hinduism, there's none of this going to hell because of this trait or because you're an animal. Everyone ultimately is saved. You just need to live enough lives to remove enough karma until you reach that point where you attain moksha. Everyone's journey is different, but everyone is on their journey. It's not yes, no, you're going to hell, you're going to heaven because of this, this, and this. So I think that's just a very key reason why Christianity is really on the way down in the West. So, as I said, everyone, the number of people who are leaving Christianity is increasing over the years, and it's now a tiny number. But unfortunately, they are leaving Christianity to become generally atheists. And that's actually a real shame, I feel, because these people then, they tend to feel quite empty. They're missing out on all the meaning that is, for example, within Hinduism, and there isn't so much meaning. And generally, these are the types of people who end up becoming, for example, alcoholics. They'll be on multiple medications. The number of people who have depression is just skyrocketing all over the world. And this is including in India. So I very recently been writing an essay about health in India. And one of the startling statistics is that mental health issues in India has doubled within a generation. And that's very much because I feel that they are adopting a much more Western mindset than looking inwards as a Hindu would and should. As I said earlier, there are these epidemiological studies that show if you look inwards, it's almost like a protective force against anything that happens, any trauma that could happen in your life. And I guess because I am a scientist, I have a physics degree and then a statistics PhD, I feel that atheism, well, it certainly doesn't satisfy me. Because ultimately, what happened before the Big Bang, for example? So in physics, you have the idea that at the beginning of the universe, all of matter, everything was condensed into an infinitely dense point. And there was the Big Bang, and that then exploded all of matter and energy outwards. but what was before that? Or what was the space, that infinitely dense object, what was the space that was in and that it's expanding into? Science cannot explain this at the moment. In fact, the laws of physics break down. The closer you get to that point of, it's called singularity, the laws of physics break down. And in fact, in the Rig Veda, it says exactly that as at the beginning of the universe, there was no matter and there was no energy, but that there were other things. So it'll draw on, for example, Bhagavan Vishnu, and how he had a dream about all of life, all of matter, all of the universe. So that there was something before then. And ultimately, as Hindus, we know that that was Bhagavan. And I find that a really sophisticated explanation that current modern day physics cannot explain. And in fact, Hinduism, it goes a step beyond that to say, well, there's not just this one universe, but it's a cyclical universe. So things that modern day physics at the moment, they have no instruments, no equipment, there are no ways to be explaining these or to be testing these ideas or to be coming up with them. But if we look into the Vedas, there is potentially the explanation there that the ancient rishis came to by looking inwards, by doing sincere tapas, by almost running experiments within themselves and coming up with all of this amazing knowledge. And so much of it has been found to be true. For example, the distance between the earth and the sun, or the geography of Bharat. When Ma Sita was abducted by Ravan, she dropped the jewellery along the way. Well, if you map out where the locations of the jewellery were found, it makes a perfectly straight line between Nashik, where she was abducted, and Ravan's home on Sri Lanka. And how on earth could that have happened if there hadn't been, if the itihas were not real, or if there was not some other way for an aerial observation of Bharat? It just makes you wonder what the sorts of technologies that they had available at that time. I mean, even the complexity of the Sanskrit language, of Carnatic music, it's just mind-boggling. Nothing in the modern world can compete with that complexity. And even things like karma, that ultimately is what in modern day world we call to be Newton's third law. But ultimately, karma is a timeless concept within Hinduism. It's always been known that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. That has now been called Newton's third law. But there is so much within the Hindu scriptures that have been validated by modern day science. It's just amazing. So as I said, Brahman, one way to think of it is that at the singularity before the Big Bang, Brahman was more than just the singularity. It's like Brahman was singularity plus plus. And that makes me feel that actually Hinduism is like science plus plus. Whereas religions like Christianity, they're very dogmatic. They have lots of rules and you have to believe them blindly. It's like the opposite of science, where in science you make observations of on the world. In Hinduism, you make observations on the world and also observations from within yourself. And it enhances science. So I see Hinduism being science plus plus. And ultimately, as I said, because I am a scientist, for me, this has really, really strengthened my conviction for Hinduism and my love for Hinduism. And through it all, I just feel so grateful to Hinduism for helping me, firstly, become mentally so strong. As I said earlier, I've set up my business, it's doing very well, and I feel I apply Hindu principles to running that business, and for that reason, it makes it a much more successful business than it would have been otherwise. And I'm also grateful because it's just helped awaken like a potential in me and a sensitivity to the world that otherwise I would not have ever been aware of. So in addition to my business, I have another area of work that I do, which is to try and promote Hinduism, particularly to Indians and Hindus, to make them realize that the greatness of their faith system, of all of the scientific achievements that have been, that Hindus have done over the thousands of years, and there have been very, very many, and ultimately to feel really proud of who they are, because you are all amazing, amazing people. And I guess because I speak from my experience as having been a Christian and now being a Hindu, I guess I can really just emphasize that all religions are not the same. I've gone from that mindset of where a section of humanity, forget animals, in Christian mindset, they don't matter at all, of humanity, only those who believe a certain way, and as Christianity divides and divides and divides, it's becoming even more specialist what that correct way is. If anybody doesn't believe that, then they go to hell for eternity. It's incredibly divisive. And how can that is not compatible with the Hindu philosophy of there being rebirth, of us all having karma, of everyone being saved. And so it just goes to show you cannot say that all religions are the same, because they're, in these two examples, they're completely incompatible. If you believe in karma, if you believe in rebirth, if you believe in moksha, a Christian says you will go and burn in hell forever. So they cannot be the same. So ultimately, the work I do, if you're interested, please do have a look on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook. I have various places where I post, particularly videos, using the name English Behen Kadilse. So Twitter, it's English @English_Behen, Facebook, English Behen Kadilse, and YouTube, English Behen Kadilse. And basically this is how I spend my free time outside of my professional business, is I make videos and write articles and things about my experience, my learning of Hinduism, and my love for Hinduism. And please do have a look. Ultimately, the whole aim of it all is just to strengthen Hindus, particularly Hindus in India, because I feel that Hinduism has so much to offer the world. It's given me so much value. Yeah, it's really strengthened me. Been so much value to me. I'm so grateful, and I feel there'd be so many others in the Western world who would benefit as well. But at the moment, Westerners don't really know about Hinduism, and ultimately, in India, if India was strong, if Hinduism was strong in India, this would multiply out across the world for the benefit of the whole world. So that is why the work I do is to strengthen Hindus in India. Yeah. So ultimately, that's the end of my my talk. I hope you found that quite interesting. I've been having my husband on the side here noting down some of the kind questions you've been asking. So I'll go through some of these. So there is one question. Okay. So there is an agenda by Conversion Mafia to label Hindus as pagans. What are your views? So yes, it's certainly true. Ultimately, Christians cannot respect Hindus. Christians cannot respect anybody who doesn't believe in their version of who is God and who was sent to the earth as Jesus. If you don't believe that, then you're going to hell. They cannot respect any other way of looking at the world. Now, for Hinduism, I feel their dislike of Hindus is even greater than it is, for example, of atheists or even of Muslims, because I feel Christians, they are scared of something that is completely unfamiliar to them. As I said, there is no compatibility between Hinduism and Christianity. So when there is such a gap between them, that is very scary for a Christian, and they can't even try to imagine to be able to understand the Hindu mindset. And so they try even harder to break it down. And unfortunately, because Christians, particularly across, they're mostly concentrated in the Western world, they come from some very powerful, some very rich places. And so there's a lot of money being pumped in to develop techniques, to refine techniques rather, because it's been going on for a while now, to be able to convert particularly Hindus to Christianity. And so to be honest, a major reason behind the work I do is to try and help Hindus to realize the greatness of their own faith, of their own culture, of their own traditions, so that if they ever come across someone who's trying to convert them, there is just no leeway, because they can see straight away the superior wealth of wisdom and knowledge of Hindu belief compared to what the person trying to convert them is trying to make them believe. And ultimately, because in Christianity, things like idol worshipping are considered to be very, very sinful, because, to be honest, the Christian God, he's a very selfish, arrogant person. He only believes that he should be worshipped in a particular form, that any other form of him around cannot be worshipped, because that would be idol worshipping. So that is another reason why Christians particularly dislike Hindus, because we feel that Bhagwan is in everything and all of us, including Murtis. And that is, I feel, such a beautiful concept and gives me so much peace. But it is very scary to a Christian, because I think actually in many ways, many of them might realize that they do appreciate that beauty in that mindset. And they feel that if more people see that beauty, actually perhaps they might leave Christianity for Hinduism. Okay, so next question. Thank you for that. That was an excellent question, Pradeepji. Do you think more people should embrace Sanatana Dharma? What are your plans? So that's an easy question. Absolutely. The world would be a much, much better place if more of the world were Hindu. So things, as I said, about looking after the world, looking after animals, looking after plants. Had the world been Hindu, we would not be facing the same challenges that we are with like global warming or extinction of species. So I remember a terrifying statistic from when the British Raj were in India, that they basically, as we all know, they caused pretty much the extinction of so many animal varieties in India. And there was one shop in, I think it was in Karnataka, where the numbers of tigers that were being killed and sent to that shop to be stuffed, it was something like 30,000 tigers a year and 25,000 leopards a year. I mean, these are just horrifying statistics. And I think just there is that mindset of man, he dominates over all other species, that he is the ruler of all other species. They are there for his amusement or his need. And Hinduism doesn't believe in that. So ultimately, the world would be such a more sustainable, such a more peaceful place if it were more Hindu. Another question. So thank you for that. Excellent question. Another question. Many Indians are afraid to call themselves Hindu. Good to hear that you are saying that I will unify as one force, from Rajeshji. So I think I couldn't quite read the handwriting here. So ultimately, as I said earlier, the work I do as English for Henry is to try and help Hindus to feel strong, to feel proud, because ultimately the reason why many Indians are scared to say that they are Hindu is that over the hundreds and in fact like 1,000 years of invaders coming in, it was actually dangerous at times to say I am a Hindu, or to have to be doing Hindu practices. There were many rulers, firstly the invaders, and then the rulers came up from outside, from other faiths, who did not take well to the Hindus, that they would put a tax on being Hindu. And so Hindus developed like a self-protection mechanism of not speaking out and not questioning these foreign thoughts, foreign invaders. And ultimately, we're now in the time where with the media and so much opportunity to speak out through social media, we all really need to be doing our part to say that, no, that's not how, we don't need to be doing that anymore. We can speak out proudly as Hindus. And so I really would encourage everyone here to do so and to tell others to do so, because otherwise we're living in a time from like 500 years ago. And actually Hinduism, as I said, is a very progressive faith. And so we need to be progressing the world and declaring proudly that we are all Hindus. If we don't, then no one will know about Hinduism. As I said, at primary school, Hinduism was never even at school, secondary school, Hinduism was never mentioned. It was almost like it didn't exist. So Hindus do have to stand up and say, I am a Hindu, and be proud. Thank you for that, Rajesh. That was an excellent question. Okay, so another question, Satyendraji. Which are the main differences between Christianity and Hinduism? So I think this comes back very much to the point I mentioned earlier about how it is not possible for all faiths to be, or religions to be the same. There are these major contradictions that make them completely incompatible. For example, that we are all have cycles of life, and that we are all progressing towards moksha, that everyone is saved. Whereas in Christianity, you feel that you've got this one life only, so you have to do everything you want to do in this one life, otherwise it'd be wasted. But actually, if you make a mess of it, it doesn't matter, because as long as you pray to the Christian God, you'll go to heaven and then have a lovely existence with, angels around you. But it's interesting that in this heaven, there wouldn't be the opportunity for there to be any animals. So anyone who is an animal lover, who loves the sound of bird song, that would never occur in heaven, because animals don't have souls. There's no way for them to get to the Christian heaven. So that's just another contradiction that I think is quite, amusing. I find quite amusing. So I would say that's the major difference between Christianity and Hinduism. It's that piece around, is there rebirth, or is this one life? And ultimately that there is karma, that you have to undo your karma. And ultimately, even that as you're accumulating karma, removing your karma, it's never a black and white thing that means you'll end up in heaven or hell. You've always got the opportunity to progress towards moksha, over many lifetimes. So another question, how should you work to counter Christian missionaries? So a few weeks ago, I actually wrote a tweet series on this exact subject. And there are a few things that you concretely can do. So my first bit of advice is, as I said, to buy Ama Chichakata comics for your children, for your nieces, your nephews, and make sure that they are really strongly proud to be Hindus, and they understand about the depth of Hinduism. I mean, it really strikes me that there is so much wisdom and depth in Hinduism that maybe at times some people find that a bit daunting, or they use that as an excuse just to kind of sit on the surface and send round pictures on Diwali of Rangoli or pictures of Bhangra. They're not looking at the deeper meaning. And that's a real missed opportunity, because if there is a foreign force trying very hard, particularly one with a lot of money and a lot of tactical power and a lot of experience in trying to convert people, it can mean that they are left a bit unprotected to being drawn into that mindset. So the stronger that your children are in understanding the wisdom, the beauty of their own faith system, that is I would say that's the main strategy everyone should take to avoid conversion of their nearest and dearest. Another thing you can do is actually to stop saying things like all religions are the same, because as I said, that's not true, or even that Hinduism is, you know, only a non-violent religion. And again, that isn't true. That's only half the story. Ultimately, Dharma is the highest truth. Because these are all things that Christians particularly, they use as mechanisms to try and convert people. So, or actually another one is that Hinduism isn't a real religion. Again, that's a very dangerous thing to say, because ultimately a Christian converter will then say, well, you don't even believe in a real religion. You know, Hinduism is not even a real religion. And actually all religions are the same. So anyway, you're already, you know, part of the Christian fold. So they'll inch closer and closer and closer and draw the person in before they even realize. And before long, you'll hear the person saying, oh, my Ishtadev is baby Jesus. And they'll be sending messages round at Christmas with, you know, Christian imagery, and before long, actually, you know, they are a Christian. They're not Hindu anymore, and it's been done very covertly, very cleverly. We can't deny the Christians that, but it's very dangerous because it does create a lot of division within India. Ultimately, it only weakens India. For India to be for India to be a strong country, a flourishing country, a first world country, it really needs to unite. It needs to draw on its ancient knowledge, on its ancient wisdom. What is great about Bharat, not what is great about bits of the West and like stealing ideas and not doing them as well. Do what is true to Bharat, what is true to everything that has arisen within Bharat, all the wisdom, all the knowledge. And that is what will make Bharat a strong country. And ultimately, I feel in future, I don't think it'll happen in my lifetime, but in future, that is what is going to make Bharat the world leader and be the country that shows the rest of the world how to live sustainably, how to live peacefully. So yes, I think that's probably a great place to end. Is there any more questions? So just 1 second, I'm just going to check if there's any more questions that come up. Just 1 second, 30 seconds, or that's it, yeah. Last chance, does anyone else want to ask any questions? I'll just wait 1 more minute, so if any more come up, I'll ask them. There's a question, like sort of rather a statement I can see right at the end about the education system, that the Marxist ecosystem is really promoting that idea that all religions are the same, and that's being, you know, fed to your children. And yes, that is a true statement of fact, and that is why actually, if you look on my YouTube channel, I have a video about the Gurukul system. And certainly, if I ever have any children, I'm going to be sending them to a Gurukul, not to a state school in India, because I do not feel that otherwise they would really learn the truth about India's history, that they will be able to have full respect for Hinduism, because there will be so many forces trying to make them believe other things that, for example, the Marxist forces are trying to, ultimately with a view to be breaking and weakening India for their own selfish gains, be it, you know, Christians, that they feel that ultimately they need to win souls. That's kind of their currency. It makes them feel good. If they don't convert people and, you know, convert these souls, they've got no value in the world. Or equally, for, you know, rich businessmen, greedy businessmen, for some of them, it is in their advantage for others within India not to do so well, so that they can be superior, maintain a position of authority.
Only 1 more minute.
Okay. So what was I saying? So, okay. So yes, the education system definitely needs to be changed. So I've got a question here. about the Hindu, how is Hinduism in pro-Islamic Britain? So, I mean, we are very fortunate that we live in the countryside. So I don't actually see this on a day-to-day basis, but certainly I'm aware that in the major cities, and when I go for work into the major cities like Birmingham, for example, Leicester, you do see that they have high populations of Muslims, and there are areas that almost operate under Sharia law. I think that they do actually, so there are some areas. So what Hindus can do is we all need to be uniting, and we need to be putting out strong narratives, particularly to the Western media, kind of exposing what is ahead for the UK if it carries on as it is. Because obviously in India, we already have the situation where about 20% of the population is Muslim and causing a lot of trouble for India. The UK isn't at 20% yet, it's less, but it's certainly increasing. You know, the birth rate of these individuals is really increasing. And ultimately, Hindus, they have such an opportunity to make Britain aware of what is going on, because ultimately Hindus are such assets to the UK. I think there's the statistic that they are, you know, I think that 2% of the population, I think it's even less, like 1% of the population, but they contribute 10% of the UK's taxes because they're very successful, they're very hard-working people. When you look at, for example, the prison statistics, there's such a tiny, negligible number of Hindus in prison in the UK. And to me, it makes complete sense because Hindus, they have such a strong moral framework. But when you compare the prison statistics of Hindus compared to the prison statistics of some Christians, I think it's like 3 times as many, if a Christian is 3 times as likely to be in prison as a Hindu. So ultimately, Hindus have so much power to help the UK to realise what is going to happen if things carry on as they are, because they have this position of power through, you know, how much they contribute and what asset they are to the UK. And unfortunately, there are certain operations within the UK, for example, the BBC, that take a pro-Islamic stance, and so the Hindus really need to be countering these bodies, and for example, making sure their children go into these professions, trying to become journalists, trying to become lawyers, trying to become politicians. And I'm very pleased to say actually that there are some really key politicians in UK politics at the moment. So they really need to be pushing the Hindu agenda and exposing what will happen in future to the UK if the numbers of Muslims keep on increasing.
That's it.
Okay, I think that is all of the questions. So if there are any other questions that I've missed, I really apologise, but what you can do is when I post the video, you can ask the question underneath and then I'll go through and answer it there. Also, you can maybe put it on Twitter, as I said, at English_Behen is my Twitter handle. So write me the question there and I'll try my best to answer it. But otherwise, I thank you all very much for listening to me. I hope you found it useful, and Jai Shri Ram. Namaste, namaste.